Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, February 22nd, George Washington's birthday, 2021, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, making my triumphant return after an Austin winter apocalypse out there. Joining me this week is my co-host, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
My Phoenix Sun. I got too distracted ad-libbing, and then I got off target. It's Trevor Starkey.
Hello. I'm back. I'm still here. Phoenix Sun, fitting given that we didn't have a blizzard storm anything out there. So yeah. It's been nice, and it was a little chilly. I was out doing a drive to grab food or something like that, and I was like, oh, it's a little brisk. And I was like, nowhere near what you guys were dealing with in Texas last week. So
it was crazy times. Yeah, this is my first podcast back with That Nerdy after everything. It was a wild time out there in Austin, Texas. Like we kind of talked about a little bit before the show. Yeah. Luckily, it was only without power for 15 hours roughly. Through the night basically too, so you could mostly just sleep in. And then without water for 4 or 5 days. But we're on the up and up. We're improving. Things got power. Places have water. Cities kind of shrugged it off. Like I told Trevor before we started recording, the weather gave us some luck after a really harsh week by warming up so quickly that everything got to melt. And so people could kind of go to make repairs and kind of assess everything. Because Austin doesn't have any snowplows, because why would they? And so, yeah, that was kind of fortunate at least. It was 73 degrees today. So it's just kind of done a full head spin in a week's time. But yeah, we're back. Myself, Jazz, Frank have all mostly done all right here. We are talking not about the weather, though, Trevor. On this episode, we are going back to our old stomping grounds here. Some messiness in the video game industry here.
I kind of wish we were talking about the weather.
I do, too, a little bit. Yeah, the video game industry, it was a weird time last week. And it was weird to see this kind of happen in real time, go from just a Twitter thread I saw to being picked up by smaller outlets like Fanbyte, I think saw, and then eventually finally hit in Kotaku kind of size outlets talking about it. Harry Potter Legacy, yet again.
Hogwarts Legacy, yeah.
Hogwarts Legacy, yes. I'm sorry, I can't say Harry Potter, but Hogwarts Legacy yet again in some hot waters here, Trevor. What happened over the week here?
So yeah, as you kind of alluded to, Liam Robertson, aka at Dr_Cupcakes, aka one of the producers behind the Did You Know Gaming series, kind of highlighted and created a Twitter thread highlighting the fact that Troy Levitt, one of the lead designers on Hogwarts Legacy, has a pretty problematic history as kind of an anti as Liam described it, a far-right YouTuber who used to make anti-fem and pro-Gamergate videos. And he, the whole thing kind of started with him doing a screenshot of, this guy's old YouTube videos featuring wonderful titles such as The Injustice of Social Justice.
Obviously.
What's another good one? In Praise of Cultural Appropriation. In Defense of John Lasseter. That was a charming one. And then he has kind of a history of attacking people like Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn and just kind of a really problematic guy, coupled with obviously a really problematic J.K. Rowling. It just seems to really reinforce that WB Games maybe just doesn't actually want people playing Hogwarts Legacy. They seem to not have a problem with that.
I was gonna say Hogwarts Legacy at this point almost seems to be going out of its way to want me not to play this game. Right? We had this whole conversation last year about Hogwarts Legacy, I think on this podcast, for sure on that Nerdy Site Show, about trying to reconcile our kind of thoughts and feelings and emotions on just Harry Potter in general to people who genuinely love this series, right? And have
I pulled out my Ravenclaw shirt that
and who've been
wearing just for it.
Deeply impacted by Harry Potter and the character and the stories, right? And the message behind it, right? Like, it's easily one of, if not the most influential book series that I've read in my life. And so, I think it's so disappointing. It's so disappointing. It's so discouraging. It's so frustrating that it just seems like no one was paying any attention in terms of, like, understanding especially in the wake of, like, understanding the controversy with JK in the last 12 to 15 months, we'll say roughly. And then being like, we're going to have one of our lead creative designs be a far right, anti-fem, anti-everything, basically, like, former YouTuber, like, pro Gamergate guy. And it's like, well, you can't see how that's going to maybe cause problems. You can't see how maybe not having that kind of person be in a position of influence and power, then kind of the game's narrative could be problematic, to say the least, right? And I just think, I just want to enjoy Hogwarts, and I just want to enjoy this world and characters, and the game is doing so much to make me not like that, and not enjoy it, and not be able to kind of, I think, really just love the things and these characters and this world that I love, right? And it's disappointing in that regard. It's frustrating in that regard, and it's also frustrating because, like, the fact we have to have this conversation in general, right? The fact that JK couldn't have just been like, chill, fam. You know what I mean? Like, the easy comparison to me for what Harry Potter and JK's kind of dynamic is at this point is like Ender's Game. Mm-hmm. And I always get the author's name wrong. I'm sure you're going to have it here in a second. But who has his own history of problematic and like
Orson Scott Card.
That's what I wanted to say. Great. So I was on the right note. Okay. Orson Scott Card's own views, right? And fans have to try to reconcile that relationship and reconcile their love for that book series versus this author and the person who kind of created its very problematic views in a lot of instances, right? And like, I think that it's possible to separate the art and the artist, but I think that it's harder when the people who have kind of been bequeathed this thing to do it that's independent of JK, right? They said, she's no involvement with the production. It's not involving her in any way. It's just using kind of the sandbox she's given us here. And then even these people maybe have their own problematic views and own problematic aspects and have their own kind of anti-equality views and thoughts. And it's like, why is it so hard to just not have someone in charge of the series who actually understands, I think, the core tenets of the series? And it just is so frustrating to be a fan of the series, I think, at this point in time, right? And to still have these people in positions of influence at, big studios, and them just being given easy access to those positions of influence and power, right? And like, it's easy to say they might not have known at the time. It's also easy to say they could have done some research.
They did, and that, so like one of the Fanbyte article that I was looking at earlier today. Mm-hmm. Talks about in a 2018 video that he did defending Atari co-founder Nolan Bushnell for some of the sexual misconduct allegations he had.
Yeah.
Levitt said, quote, "I'm happy to say that even though I disclosed this, my YouTube channel to WB Games, it didn't appear to be an issue for them. Not that they endorse anything I've said, of course, but at least they seem more concerned with making good games than with pushing some kind of social justice agenda. So there is hope." So yeah,
that was in 2018. You said,
because he's been like, that's presumably when he got hired with WB Games. So yeah, that was in a video that he recorded back in 2018. Because that was one of the things that came up was the kind of premise or preface that he led into that with was. Some of you have expressed that due to my commentary on some game industry controversies and my sympathies for the Gamergate movement, that I might have a difficult time should I ever want to return to professional game development. And then he goes on to say, well, WB hired me anyway, so ha ha ha. And yeah, that's like, that right there. Yeah. The fact that like WB leadership knew who this
Knew.
guy was and hired him anyway
Just didn't care.
makes me immediately say, well, I never want to work with WB. Not that I ever like am even positioned to go into that side of games anyway, but like I have zero interest if I ever did to go work for WB Games now. And at this point, I'm not going to play Hogwarts Legacy. I'm like, there have been enough things here that game is not going to, like, that game, in line with other like past WB efforts, I think is going to be, a 7 at best kind of game anyway. So I don't need to dive into that. Like I can enjoy other aspects of the Harry Potter universe, or I can just wait for more people who were inspired by Harry Potter to keep making cool games. Like there's that Chucklefish game that's coming out sometime. That's a School of Magic kind of thing, but in like 16-bit style or something like that. Iconfell was a game that I really enjoyed last year.
Yeah.
That tells a similar type of story, but with a much more inclusive cast and of characters and stuff. And so at this point, I'm just like, I don't know what they could do to actually sell me on this game at this point. If they've washed their hands in the past, because something to remember is like right after all the JK stuff was going and the game formally got announced, WB Games president David Haddad addressed Rowling's politics in an internal Q&A saying, quote, "She's entitled to express her personal opinions on social media. I may not agree with her, and I might not agree with her stance on a range of topics, but I can agree that she has a right to hold her opinions." Like, that's fine if like personally you want to believe that, but you, I think, have a responsibility to take a stand and renounce those harmful opinions. Like, trans lives matter. Trans lives are human lives. Yes. Trans rights are human rights. All of that is like so essential that like to just,
and took you 10 seconds to say.
Yeah.
Not even like it takes,
to brush it aside and say, well, no, she can believe what she wants to believe. Like, fuck you. Like, she can, and the fact that you say that means you're not you being somebody in a position to renounce that and say, she believes that, we disagree with her, like Daniel Radcliffe has, like Rupert Grint has, like Emma Watson has. Like, it's not hard to say we don't stand by her statements. In fact, we publicly renounce them. We're going to make this game, and we're going to make it inclusive and blah, blah, blah. But when you've got a leader like this guy who like just casually throws around, being a Gamergate supporter and the, term SJWs and stuff like that, like, this guy clearly doesn't like believe in making this an inclusive game or just inclusivity in general. So at this point, like, fuck this game. I don't need it. Like, I'm sure there will be plenty of other things for me to play. I don't need to hop into early 1900s Hogwarts or late 1800s Hogwarts or whatever and become a wizard. Like, there are plenty of other stories I can enjoy in gaming.
I think you touched on something really important too that I hadn't even really thought about, which is the fact that, I mean, I'm going to focus on Daniel Radcliffe, obviously as the face of the franchise. In a lot of ways. I mean, I think certainly now when I think Harry Potter, I think Daniel Radcliffe's face pops into my mind, right? Like, he's, even when I read the books, that's just morphed into what it is. And so the only person I think that's really kind of comparable to JK in terms of like pop culture imagery when you think of the series. And yeah, he did. I mean, Daniel Radcliffe owes, you could argue, his kind of entire career. What will be his legacy in a lot of ways is going to be that series to JK, right? Like, and I'm sure certainly they had, I don't know what the state of the relationship is now, but certainly they had a very good relationship, it seemed like. I'm sure he's very grateful to what she's kind of provided for him and the way she's provided so many millions of people around the world. But he didn't hesitate, right? Like, in Daniel Radcliffe, when he's giving these interviews, very explicitly said, trans lives matter, trans rights are human rights, right? Like, he didn't beat on the bush. He didn't say that, like, oh, well, she's not a friend. She said, like, no, like, this is the thing. It takes me 10 seconds to say it, yet it's hugely important to the people that it matters to, right? And I think that's what you can say. I mean, it's that simple. It's that, like, I mean, JK is just wrong on this, right? Like, It doesn't mean she's wrong in everything. I mean, she may be wrong in a few things, though. But she's unquestionably, explicitly, without a shadow of a doubt, wrong on this thing. Like, she is not correct. Trans rights are human rights. And, that's kind of statement that Daniel put out. Like you said, it's the kind of statement that Rupert put out, that Emma Watson put out. And I think that that's what you would want someone like this to say, right? Like, I don't know where I'm at with Hogwarts Legacy, truthfully. I've kind of, I'm still where I'm at, I think, in a lot of ways. I'm just kind of figuring it out. But I think unquestionably there are 7 Harry Potter books, to say nothing of 8 movies, for people to go through and spend time and invest in that world and not play a game that is, at the very least, very troubled, I think, in terms of the atmosphere, in terms of how they're approaching things with regard to these issues. And I think that, myself and Trevor are not the arbiters of, good taste and the right and wrong thing for any individual person to do in terms of what they want to consume and what they don't want to consume in terms of media. But I think that any sort of discussion, and certainly any sort of review that would ever appear on that nerdy site about Hogwarts Legacy would very much directly be confronting and tackling these issues as well. Certainly any review that I would write that would appear on the site, or that I would edit that would appear on the site, I would shape to have this kind of conversation around it in the same way that I did when I talked about Detroit Become Human and Quantic Dream back in 2018, right? Like, and I very explicitly had a discussion about that game's troubled workplace culture there as well. I mean, I think it's impossible, certainly for me at the very least, maybe for, greater men than I, but certainly for me, it's impossible to separate the issues around Hogwarts Legacy and the issues around the game's refusal to really kind of strongly condemn transphobia like I would like it to, and B, one of its lead creative designers just being a far-right troll, basically. It's impossible to separate that from the game itself. And whenever I would play the game, if I do for review here or otherwise, I would have to reconcile those two conflicting kind of ideas and threads together and form an opinion based on that. And I think that nerdy site in general would have that conversation. I mean, this will not be the last time we talk about Hogwarts Legacy, unfortunately or not, both on this show and otherwise in that nerdy site. And so that's the kind of coverage and that's the kind of conversation that you would expect when we do talk about it, is very much addressing this issue and these problems that it seems the game is plagued with at this point.
Yeah. It has just been like, even before it started getting announced, obviously, it was the worst kept secret in the industry that WB was working on a Harry Potter game for the longest time. And so the fact that like it had that troubled, like, why haven't we seen it? Oh, because they're clearly still trying to figure out what it is. To it being announced in the wake of J.K. Rowling just going full transphobe, and then them immediately distancing themselves in the same way that like a company says, "Oh, our game isn't meant to be political." Like, fuck you, it's political. I'm just like, I'm waiting for them to say that and just hit the like that news you care about bingo card. Because they originally kind of came out and was like, JK is not directly involved in the creation of this game, blah 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 blah. It's not a new story. But then in that internal Q&A, just being like, I may not like what she says, but she has a right to say it, instead of, I don't like what she says and she shouldn't say it because her words matter. She has
here's why it's
incredible
wrong.
power, and here's why it's wrong. Here's why her perspective on this matter is wrong, and we disavow it. They didn't say that. They said, no, she can say whatever she wants to say. We're just bowing at her altar because we're making the game. And then this guy this comes to light, which like. As kind of was pointed out in the original thread, like, none of this is new. Like, this has all been open and whatnot. It's just like it's shining a light on it that people hadn't kind of put two and two together until this weekend. But yeah, like the fact that this really problematic guy is working on this game just is like, well, I have zero interest. Like, even if they like come out tomorrow and say, hey, we've heard your backlash, we've seen your backlash, he no longer works for us, whatever, like, I'm still going to be like, you hired him in the first place knowing exactly who he was. So it wasn't a deal breaker
3 to 4
then
years.
when nobody was paying attention. It's only a deal breaker when we call you on it. Is a bigger issue. It's like what is it? In the words of Dumbledore, the weight of a man is not is how he acts, when nobody's watching, or what. I'm sure I butchered a quote or whatever, but I feel like that's something in one of those books is talking about our character is not what we do when people are watching, but it's what we do when people aren't.
To say nothing. I mean, just to say nothing of the fact that, I mean, you touch on a big point for me, 2 ones, but one in particular I'm going to focus on, which is that fact that, like, they didn't call it out when JK said it, and JK, like you alluded to, has so much potential power. Like, and if you don't think that's true, look at the ability she had to, I think, influence young readers and older readers' minds and opinions on a host of things. I mean, Harry Potter is, pretty explicitly against, right, like, xenophobia and, like, hatred, and it is very clearly a story about the devastating and debilitating effects of feeding into fear and hatred and, like, xenophobia and anti-everythingism, right? And that...
And you go and hire basically Draco Malfoy to come and make your Hogwarts Legacy game.
Yeah, and I think the bigger point is that, like, and I think that influenced kids' minds, right? Like, I think that made an impact. I think it made a difference, right? Like, kids are, A, they're smarter than people give them credit for almost constantly, but B, like, they absorb those kind of stories, through, like, Saturday morning cartoon, like, PSAs and, like, after school specials that you watch, but also through, like, what they read in the media they consume. And this was the kind of defining media for, like, 1995 to, like, 2010, basically. And that had an impact. Like, she changed people's minds and how they viewed the world, I think, from a very young age for people kind of in our generation or younger. And she could have done the same thing here, is the point. Like, she could have taken that same stance with trans rights, right? She could have come out right at the forefront again, like she has for women's rights, where she's repeatedly gone to, like, the mat on that issue, and she could have said, hey, like, trans rights are human rights, right? Like, trans lives are human lives. Like, it's that simple, right? And she didn't. Like, she missed such a clear opportunity to yet again, I think, kind of guide and help mold the upcoming generation's views on these issues and the older generation's views on these issues, right? And it's so disappointing. It's such a huge swing and a miss for both her to fail at and then for the studio to fail at, and kind of directly calling that out and addressing that, right? Like, it's that simple. Like, she has such a huge platform, right? Like, she is, I would say, with maybe the sole exception of Stephen King, like, the author that you probably is going to come to mind. You think of, like, who is a famous author? It's probably going to be J.K. or Stephen King. It's one of the two. And they've taken two very different approaches to this issue. And I think that's so disappointing on both her side of things and on WB Games' side of things. And then also, just because I wasn't here last week, and so I'm going to take my swing at the pinata this week. Every game, every piece of art, by its very nature of existing, is inherently political. Every, basically, act that any person makes is in some ways political, essentially. Like, there's no way to get around that, but certainly any piece of art is political. Every game, every film, every TV show, every book is political, for sure. Every play is political, for sure. As Trevor is very well aware of, I'm sure. And so it's just... to go back to last week now for a little bit, because I wasn't here to talk about a game set about a
6
war.
Days in Fallujah,
yeah, which is inherently political warfare. I mean, everything is political, like, and you can view that as a bad thing if you want, I guess, but that just means that you're just not aware of the entire larger world around you, right? Like, people have opinions and thoughts on things, and art, by its very nature, is someone taking an opinion on a subject and framing a thing in a certain way because they get to choose how it's going to be told to you. And so games are political. All art is political. All medium, all storytelling is political. That's the point of storytelling, is that it's political, that it's giving you their view or their thoughts on something. But even more so when it's a game about a literal ongoing war. It's political. Anyway, Harry Potter's political. It's all political.
Yeah.
Harry Potter's, I would argue, not even like discreetly political. Harry Potter's very openly political again. It does not try to hide these things.
Yep.
It is like very referencing like the Holocaust and World War II and the Nazis pretty explicitly in the Death Eaters. Like it's not even like a slightly hidden like political story like Star Wars, you could argue, if you're very oblivious to what that one is also pretty clearly, referencing. I mean, these are things, every giant, massive media thing that you think of, like all the biggest franchises in games, but especially outside of games, are all super political, right? Like Star Wars, the original trilogy is both anti-Vietnam War and very clearly like an allegory on the Nazis and their rise to power and fascism and everything involved in that, right? Same is true for like pretty much every single MCU or DC hero. I mean, these are stories that were written by immigrants about the immigrant experience in a lot of ways. I mean, Superman literally written, like I said, it's just that's his story.
Yeah.
He's an alien come to another country, basically, right? And so these are things that are all very political. And the same is true for video game franchises as well. Like the fact that you maybe don't recognize them is not the fact that they're not political. It's just the fact that you didn't recognize it and you didn't catch it. But it's very much the case.
Yep.
Anyway, that's what I have to say about that. Trevor, do you have any final thoughts on WB Games and Hogwarts Legacy?
I'm just like continually disappointed by everything everything that has come out, and I imagine that will continue to come out about Hogwarts Legacy. They are much like CD Projekt Red, our other kind of like proverbial punching bag, constantly stepping on rakes and smacking themselves in the face. It's just absurd how like easy any of this is to avoid these issues, and they don't care because they are in a position of comfort and power that they can get away with that. I mean, the final thing I would just add is just it's so disappointing. It just feels like it's so disappointing that like these people in positions of power at WB Games that are making a Harry Potter game, it just seems like I've never read a Harry Potter book. And it seems disappointing that J.K. herself has seemingly never read the books that she wrote. But it feels particularly upsetting coming in the wake of like the team behind Seasons and their whole controversy actually making some sort of like positive changes there, right? And actually like doing something. And this like the very next week, it feels like it's just like, well, the video game industry goes one step forward and two steps back. An old that West Wing It pod joke. And it's just it's frustrating, and it constantly feels like we're in a tug of war battle in the games industry, where every day kind of feels like it could go one way or the other. But we will do what we can to call it out pretty explicitly whenever we see it. I don't know what the next few months and years for Hogwarts Legacy look like, but I'd forgotten that they already pushed it to 2022 because
Yeah.
originally it was slated that it was supposed to come out this year, but they announced like 2 weeks into the year or something. They were like, "Hey, actually, we're not gonna make 2021." So
it was the very first game to get delayed in our prediction, games looking forward to for 2021 list.
Yeah, that's right. That was it. Like in between us talking about it on the episode and the episode going live, it got delayed.
So, but yeah, we will see. Trevor, do you have any shout-outs for the week?
I don't. I did. I forgot to mention it last week, but like Danny O'Dwyer. I guess this is my mini shout out. Danny O'Dwyer did a Noclip thing on Bugsnax, and he basically brought in one of the designers from is it Young Horses, to kind of talk through like how a lot of the bugs were designed and just a lot of the design mentality of the game. And so it's a cool little like 20 to 30-minute video of just kind of like
It's super cool.
that developer kind of talking about the ideas behind a lot of the characters and kind of how they interact with each other and with the world and stuff. So it's a cool little Noclip thing. I'll throw that in the comments. How about you?
Yeah.
Any shout-outs from
I
you?
love that. So my shout-outs are very specific. They're shout-outs to two different things that Gene Park did over at the Washington Post. I just love his writing, and he's very funny on Twitter too. But they were basically, neither one of us from this year. They're both from, well, I guess technically 2 years ago now, in 2019. But he had like reposted them. And they're his rankings of the Washington Post rankings, not just his, of like
Zelda?
the best Mario games and the best Zelda games. I actually read his Mario one first, and it is, I tweeted this out too, like it is pretty much what my list of like the best and worst Mario games would be, of like the mainline variety. Like it's pretty much spot on where I would go at, including having what is my like favorite Mario game at the top spot. Mario the Galaxy games are real good, guys. And then Zelda, obviously, I infamously have a much more contentious relationship with that series, but it was interesting to read. Even I would not agree with his number one pick. I still understand that me and Trevor are in the minority on that. But it was still interesting to just read his thoughts on that as well. So I just recommend people go read those two rankings out. The Mario one in particular is like really cool because like I feel like I have a more like eclectic-y like ranking of Mario games, and his is like pretty much aligned with mine. Like I probably only like basically like push up 64 higher and then push down Mario World a little bit lower, but otherwise it was pretty much where I'd be at. And so it was kind of interesting to see and fun to see someone have similar thoughts. Those two franchises are real good, but that's a show.
One last shout out.
Oh, sure, they had a surprise shout out.
Shout out to our friend Belinda Garcia, who announced today that she is now an associate narrative designer over with Sledgehammer Games.
Absolutely, shout out to
she
Belinda.
Departed Ubisoft recently, and kind of made the announcement today of her new gig, and it's super exciting, especially having talked to her at PAXs and stuff about her love of writing and her eagerness and desire to write for video games. The fact that she's now going to be a video game writer is really cool. I'm super happy for her. Super excited for her. She's the best.
She absolutely deserves it. She's the best and easily one of the most positive people I'm sure either one of us know. That is the show. Otherwise, though, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Like all of our wonderful patrons have. Their support keeps lights on and makes shows like this and like that D Plus show happen. And we're endlessly grateful and thankful for all of that. If I do say so myself, we've been on quite a roll lately with our Patreon exclusive episodes, for example, and they're only worth $1, and they're always worth it. Including, we're going to be recording one of those probably this week here as well, so keep your eye holes glued for that in the next either week or month whenever you hear it. But yeah, you can go over to patreon.com/thatnerdsite. We're always looking at things, tweaking things at the little tiers and goals and goodies and gadgets to get. And it means the world to us, and again, keeps everything spinning over here at That Nerdy Site. You can also go support us by subscribing to the podcast services all around the globe, liking, subscribing, sharing, rating, reviewing us on iTunes, giving us some 5 stars, leaving us a review. It really does help, and Trevor will read them every 3 to 4 months, and he really will enjoy it when he does. So make Trevor Starkey happy.
I definitely checked them more frequently because we had a crazy spike, not on this show, but on a couple of our on that D Plus show and on 1 or 2 of our episodes of That Nerdy Site show. Like suddenly just thousands of people downloading our episodes compared to the usual dozens.
Shout to that.
And
shout to that SEO high.
Yeah, and as I said on That Nerdy Site show, thank you, or no, on that D Plus show, thank you to our sudden influx of French subscribers. But yeah, so I tuned in, or I checked into the like all of the reviews to see if especially I guess because we did get a couple comments on last week's video, which was just me talking about 6 Days in Fallujah. And so I kind of checked to see if that was getting like a spike or in particular like negative comments that, were going to weigh us down or something like that. No, fortunately, the people that were annoyed by or just kind of like seeking out, SJWs like me, were quite content to just leave their comment in their super racist comment on the video that immediately got deleted and not actually go in and like leave reviews or anything like that. So, yay.
Absolutely. Always enjoy that good hate mail. Otherwise, you can go follow Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to plug or shout out?
Follow and subscribe to our YouTube, youtube.com/thatnerdysite, where in addition to all of the video versions of the podcast going live, every Tuesday and Thursday we have Let's Plays going up. Predominantly my That Retro Gaming Show series, where I'm playing through right now all of the NES Classic games. Yesterday's episode, as of this episode going live, was Double Dragon 2: The Revenge, which, as I touch on
Double Dragon
in the video, despite having had the game for my entire life and having it like right here, right by me, did not realize until I sat down to do that video that wasn't just called Double Dragon. Like, realizing it was called Double Dragon 2: The Revenge was like a shock to me. So yeah. But and also that game has quite possibly the weirdest combat like controls of any game I've ever played, because the way it's set up. So on the NES controller, B is the left button and A is the right button, right? Yeah. Yes. B is the left button, A is the right button. And so B is always attack to your left, and A is always attack to your right, regardless of which direction you're facing. So it gets really confusing, and you can watch me in the video get really confused by that for the first couple of minutes of the Let's Play, because it's just like, who thought that was a cool idea? Instead of like one of these buttons being punch and one of these buttons being kick, it's just one of these is attack left and one of these is attack right, and you have to hold both of them to jump, and it's just not great controls for a game from 1990.
Yeah, go figure. I will also second that shout out as well. Go check out the YouTube channel; it's great. A lot of good stuff up there, if I say so myself. I'm also just going to give a shout out to Trevor Starkey in general for manning the ship as the awesome crew basically just all unplugged for an entire week as a winter storm descended on us, and pumping out all kinds of that good content TM out there for That Nerdy Site, and including doing at least 2 solo podcasts, I believe.
Yep.
As well as the regular Let's Plays that he had go up on Tuesday and Thursday as well. And then we also had Jazz actually had a piece go live on Friday. She actually managed to write during a winter storm, so shout out to her.
I don't know what it was, but her NHL mascots ranking piece also got a ton of traffic recently on the site.
I bet. NHL fans are crazy.
In particular, yesterday as we were recording this, so Sunday, it had just like randomly out of the blue, this thing that she wrote a couple months ago had like 100 hits on the website. I was like, wow, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, go check that out as well. It was a very kind of unorthodox
game of the year
list.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I enjoyed it. So go check that as well. And everyone just say all the nice things about Trevor for keeping the site going for that week while everyone was kind of out. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of the That Nerdy Site fam, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and play your games.